All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Wireheads. This is part 2 of episode 40. Somehow a year didn't kill us. We're still here. I don't know how we're still doing it after a year, but we still have bad ideas of things to talk with all of you about, to present on this one bad station every single week. And so my name, for those of you who are new here, is Emmerron. I am a less and less frequently producing content creator on YouTube and Twitch. And I mostly these days am a professional GM over on StartPlaying. Of course, joining me as always is my co-host.
Hello, everybody. I'm Diamond Dust. I am a content creator over on Twitch and got some stuff cooking for YouTube, including another Starship presentation here pretty soon. Of course, of the fan-loved Spirit of Detroit pretty soon. That being said, I am also a professional GM, and we will be talking a little bit more about Cyberpunk on the YouTube as well. I'm spinning a lot of dishes right now, and one really big dish being a big orange box that we're going to be putting all our stuff in, and going down to where Emmerron is. So yeah, great time.
They'll understand what the heat of the desert sun really is, why people call it that. First of all, to kind of to connect the continuity here of the last part of the episode to our current one, we were going to talk about number stations, because the last radio station mentioned in this month's DLC, which I agree with Diamond, I'd seen all the pages of that except for the last one. Somehow I missed that. So the counting station here is referencing number stations, which we know have been publicly, we have had awareness of them since I believe it's the Cold War. So what they are is they're shortwave radio stations. So like they aren't ones that are broadcast like on FM or AM bands. They're very shortwave, like ham bands for the most part.
Okay.
And they're quite literally just like random like tones and numbers that are recited over it. And there's never been, to my understanding, I think, official recognition of what they are supposed to do. But it is at the bare minimum supposed, with a certain degree of educated guesswork here, that they were used to transmit encrypted messages to covert operatives in the field more quickly than a regular message, or more securely than maybe a pen and paper message could arrive, or other kind of, discrete message could arrive for them to take advantage of. So,
okay.
But they just like the counting station at the end of the DLC kind of says, in real life, they've been the source as a result of many, many conspiracy theories, because they are not gone. Like, there are plenty of number stations that are, like, to this day still live. They're still active. They're still producing numbers and tones and all of that to this day. So, like, without knowing what the real purpose is, it's weird. It's a weird one. We don't really know what the deal is, but we know that they're there. And that's all we know. So it's kind of fascinating. But yeah, that's what that is referencing. So now you know. And now you can use that to torment your players, which is a beautiful thing, because now you know what the sort of things that we use the real life equivalent of that for, or at the very least suppose that we do. So you can't even do internet over ham radio. It's terrible, but it can be done. Or you can even do internet over ham radio. Yeah, like, I mean, I imagine it's probably about the speed of like dial up, if that, but it's, yeah. I mean, you can. Of course, when we're talking the 60s, the internet was just getting its conceptual legs, I think, up off the ground. Because even computing then was very, 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 like, in its nascent beginnings. It was giant rooms. For those of you who have not seen Hidden Figures and whose YouTube Shorts algorithms are not swamped with clips from it like crazy, I highly recommend it. Great film about sending men into space for the first time from NASA. But the lesser known, African American women that were kind of part of that push and did not receive nearly the recognition they deserved. But they feature one of these giant IBM computers in there. So if you want to see what that was like, the size of it, and understand that your phone in your pocket has more computing power than that thing and the computers that went up on all of the space shuttles have combined. Your phone is more powerful than the entire 60s space program. Congratulations. So with that all said, let's actually dive into the thing that I want to talk about. So this comes because this question actually came in. I felt really bad when I noticed this. So the question's been in our inbox for the podcast for about 2 weeks because I've been just busy dealing with all kinds of other stuff. My taxes were a thing. Some other game planning stuff has become more of a thing. And so in the shuffle, I missed this question that had come in from one of our listeners. And the question as I received, I'll read it verbatim because I don't want to convey or construe the intent of the question. But it's, so I'm running a gang campaign where my player's gang is closely allied with the Aldecaldo nomads. I want to run an arc based on the Danger Gal dossier plot hook where 2 members of the Aldecaldo sightseers are taken into custody, igniting tension between the 2 groups. A few packs decide to attack the local precinct and protest and recruit the players to help. How do you guys see this conflict playing out, or the long-term effects? Any tips for an aspiring GM? I think it could be the start of the Aldecaldo's fall from grace, similarly tarnishing the reputation of the nomads at large. So the at-large bit was my own addendum, but I still think that that's worth clarifying. So I will answer that question more directly as we move into this, because I think that there's a lot to unpack with the framework behind that. As we would say, the task looks relatively simple. It's fairly well defined there. The operation to get that solution for the task is more complex than you'd think, and it does require a little bit of forethought, a little bit of planning, and honestly just a little bit of thinking about the world. So here's the part where I tell you, lore is your friend. Lore is completely mutable. In your hands as a GM, the lore can be like clay. You do not have to follow the lore as written in any one source book. It is completely to do with as you please, as Artal never tires of reminding us, because a lot of people, like me, I'm very much in the camp of I want to run most of my campaigns, or at least start most of my campaigns, as close to being compliant with the long-term meta-narrative of Cyberpunk as I can get it, because it gives a little bit of familiarity to the setting for players who are familiar with 2077 or the anime, or have read 2020, or have done any of that kind of field work on the side to kind of understand, like, what world am I diving into. So I don't like throwing out the narrative or the lore wholesale. When you approach things, Diamond, how comfortable are you with fucking with the meta narrative of Cyberpunk when it suits your campaign to do so?
I mean, it will at some. I can sometimes go way off the wall, and like I think my stories kind of stay close and clustered close enough that it would never really impact the meta narrative by much. So, like very much, I like to keep my stories, very much to the characters and what they're doing. And sure, something might come up that might have some bigger implications down the road, but it wouldn't change your view on what 2077 would look like, what 2020 would look like, or even what Time of the Red would look like. I think as a way Jay Gray put it to me once while we were, I think it was Gen Con. What's really canon, or actually, I think he even said it at the seminar. What's really the canon of every cyberpunk campaign is literally just a drunk old person at the end of the bar rambling about things that may or may not have happened.
Yep.
And also, it's the time of the red. There's always going to be big fish stories that come up.
Yep.
You can come up with a real whale of a tale if you could.
Yeah, and I mean, in the time of the red, especially with the world as broken as it is, it's not hard to imagine that someone somewhere like transmitted over that long-term, hour-long delayed intercity line. Like, yeah, you won't believe what I did today in Seattle. And it's like, who knows? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. It doesn't really matter. You know, you're talking to your friend in Seattle. It could have happened. It could not have happened. It doesn't really matter. Clearly, I don't care about the meta narrative in most of my campaigns. I like starting from a common reference point where the campaign goes need not comply with the fact that the 2070s are gonna happen. The 2070s on a calendar, they're gonna still happen. Whether they look anything like the 2070s envisioned in the video game or the anime, or it's completely up for changing. I don't really care if David and his crew ever happen to, show up on the scene and do what they do. I don't really care about that. What I do care about is my players having an interesting time. And sometimes that takes the shape of a nuke getting dropped on the city, which is how 2 of my campaigns have ended at this point.
Actually, there's an awesome resource for the question, Danger Gal Dossier Plus.
Yep.
They actually have a prompt that really is close to what you're suggesting. By the way, listener, who was the person sending in the question? I need to find their name.
I would need to look in the email, but yeah, like
I got it.
Yeah.
Andy. All right, so Andy, on page 4 of DangerGala.ca Plus, there is actually a prompt called Jailbreak. And honestly, I'm looking at this whole lineup of different parts of the Sightseers, and you could write like a whole, actually kind of fits well with continuity and conveyance. You could probably write a whole campaign based out of this,
right?
Where you could even just as a crew be a third party stuck in the middle, trying to find a way to keep the supply chain alive, but at the same time also not causing the entire city to get wrapped up into chaos either.
Or do
especially. I guess if you're like Team Inferno over there and just like to throw everybody's lives into panic.
Because my point in saying this is it's important to understand the common starting point here from some of the lore. Like, you can take liberties even with this if you're feeling comfortable and up to it. But I know a lot of people come to a Cyberpunk campaign thinking of common reference points. And they're going to think about, okay, well, the presumptive position we're in 2045 Night City. Nomads, we know, supply most of the city. The NCPD isn't a corporation yet, but they act usually not terribly justly most of the time. They are very much like corrupt cops that are underfunded. They're just looking to, like, the best of them are probably looking to get home to their families if they have them at the end of the day, or at the very least walk home alive and maybe drink a can of Smash in front of their TV before they pass out. Like, but they want to survive the day. That's the best of them. The worst of them want to make hell for the people, like the Sightseers, because they just don't particularly like them.
Like looking through NCPD as well, you could find actually some. I would suggest also look through the NCPD section
Yep.
to really like get some stuff here to really gather up a good plot before you put this in front of the players. Because, of course, you're going to have some good nuggets in the NCPD, such as Cherub. He, bright-eyed, all for the public interest, fresh out of the academy. He's trying to do some good. You got to have an edge runner, an edge runner who happens to be a cop. But then, of course, you got Sarge and apparently Pitbull also tied up in this mess with the sightseers. And Pitbull... All right, looking at her background. Where was she on the night the hope the burnt down is my question.
So the bottom line here, because my purpose in bringing this up was not to answer the question immediately, because there's thinking. So all of this is good resource, though. What Diamond has just brought up is entirely good resource, and it's good background. Like that's some of the intel you need before you really dive down what happens, right? Because we have to first know, how do we get here, right? There's a great creator on YouTube that I find myself rabbit holing down some very, very interesting narratives by virtue of the fact that he tells stories very well, which is the guy's handle, I know he goes by, is Stakui, I think is how you pronounce it. But he runs the History of Everything podcast, and he has some wonderful insight on what is happening in the modern world that we learn by looking at the history of it, right? So he has some stuff about like modern China, like how did modern China get to this place where like the buildings are falling apart in front of everyone's eyes, or like, the building and real estate firms in the country have gotten absolutely massive, and like, why is that such a big thing over there or whatever. And he tells it through the frame of reference of like, this is how we got here. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what led to this, right? And this can be something that is supported by lore. This can be something completely unsupported by lore. Like in the case of Neon Inferno Season 2, this is me figuring out in the 6 months that passed between the two seasons, what had to happen in the city in a very broad, high-level overview sort of way to land the city where we find it in the state that we find it in at the start of season 2, right? And like and part of that is like, okay, NorCal military base gets a nuke dropped on it. One of the biggest protection firms in the city that is serving as sort of a front for Arasaka to get them back into the city. Both of these things crash. And so we now need to know, okay, Militech's no longer a thing, at least not in a large part of Night City. They've got like a small little base at the very southern end in the Badlands that they still do some operations from, but like their forces are greatly diminished. Their stockpiles are virtually non-existent. They are getting some things in by AV and by like vehicle transport, but most of what they're getting in is stuff that they're anonymously sourcing from local fixers and stuff who still want to work with them. So like, now I know what Militech is doing, right? So now what's the NCPD doing in the face of a lot of this? Because obviously this is civil unrest. Another nuke got dropped. They aren't not going to be part of the narrative. Like they are very much going to be involved with whatever comes next. So like they are going to take martial law probably. Like that is going to be the approach. In status degree of martial law, we will lock down parts of the city, especially the parts of the city where we think this sort of thing could have come from, because it's not totally clear. But we know that there's like rumors enough to follow up on that the combat zones are likely a problem. So we're going to lock them down. We're going to try and cut them off from the rest of the city while we do the investigation. Of course, the moment you start exercising that kind of broad power, you're going to keep abusing it and abusing it and abusing it. And that's kind of what we see play out into the season itself. But that's all the questions and fact finding I need to do. So in your case, this would probably start with questions like, what were those sightseers doing when they got arrested, right? And I think some of that does get kind of lightly spelled out in Danger Gal dossier. So you have like a little bit of help with answering that question. But there are particulars you're going to need to answer for yourself. Like, how guilty are the people, if they're guilty at all? what evidence or fabricated evidence does the NCPD have against them? What level of security does the NCPD treat them with in order to like keep them in their care, essentially, even if it's not particularly caring. In order to keep them detained, what do they have on them? Do they have blackmail on them? This is another good thing to think about, is what do they have to hold over their heads? Because that is also something that they could very well do, and that they very likely would do. All of this is stuff that, like, you don't need to have this completely answered when you walk into that, adventure in the campaign, but you definitely need to know some of this, or at least the beginnings of it, because this is going to be a lot of your early hooks are gonna diverge off of this knowledge, right? And this is going to be where, like, the local fixers that they're working with in the Aldecaldos are probably going to approach them. They're going to tell them a version of the story, right? How true that is up to you and the motivations of the characters presenting it. But that is kind of like, that's where you begin, is understand what the nomads at least would have as their side of the story, and like how they understand things. And understand that nomads in general they're seen as a necessary evil by most people in the city, but they aren't exactly favored by the city in a lot of cases. They're seen as weird. They're seen as kind of alien because they're not from the city. They're weird. They go between the cities, the dangerous places.
They're from the wrong side of the Mississippi.
Well, not all of them. Not all of them are.
Well, the Aldecaldos are from LA, so I guess I don't blame that. I'm kidding. LA, to my LA viewers, it's okay. It's all right. I'm sorry, Joe.
We only judge you a little bit. But no, the reality is that people don't trust what they don't know, and people don't really know the nomads. Nomads also, even though like a lot of times that nomads are referred to, like even 2077, there's a line where V asks Rogue if she knows any hick nomads. So like even in that era, the nomads are referred to as like hicks, and that certainly comes up to being like, okay, well, they're the broad strokes that I think our minds kind of connotate to that are they're probably uneducated. They are not particularly like up with the times. They may be a little bit traditional and old-fashioned. And while that second part may stand to be sort of true, the first part of that, in that the nomads are uneducated, is actually patently false. They're some of the most intelligent people in the time of the Red because they actually learn things.
And I bet we're going to even learn more about the nomads, and like they had to learn how to do business somehow. Mm-hmm. So you get people like Woodchipper, who actually Woodchipper would be very useful for like helping pull that that story together that you're thinking, Andy. But also another part with continuity. Not everyone's got to have the same motives all the time. Maybe you might, because I know between Emmerron and I, both of our Rex Royales are vastly different from each other.
Yep.
My Rex, yes, businessman first, landlord second, but also pretty benevolent to the people to his people on one block. Whereas I don't know, like the Royale on your end, Emmerron, feels very much he is always going to be himself first at the end of the day, from like what I perceived of him.
Yeah, he's not afraid to be himself because he views himself as having kind of earned that privilege, but he's generally still a little more like guarded around the people that he feels he needs to be face first to. Which is to say, like, if you know him really well, he'll let you into his house. He'll bring you into his inner circle. He'll give you things that are only afforded to people who have really earned his trust, right? But you have to earn it first. That's always been my Rex Royale. He's the suave underground business person. He's like if what's his name from the first John Wick, the Russian mobster whose son literally starts everything.
I've never watched the John Wick films.
When we're hanging out after you're down here, I own the first 3, so we can do that. They're very good. But basically, he very much like comes off the same kind of way, where he's like almost like a businessman of the underground. This is where that exec role really does kind of kick in a weird way, because like I play mine a little more exec than his stat block kind of suggests you would play him in Black Chrome, because in there he's just a fixer, but in my world he feels more exec light, with the knowledge that he deals in the underworld, and so edge runners, stolen goods, shady dealings, all that kind of stuff. Rex is kind of apprised of all of that, knows what's going on. And the only one who might know or have leverage on him would be Mr. K. And so that is one of those things where overall, you need to know your characters as well, like in their motivations, because when you start going from here's what the nomads understand and what the police understand the scenario to be, and then you might write a third perspective, because it's always like there's a saying, with any one event, there's 3 sides to the story. There's your side, their side, and the actual truth of it. And they some of those narratives could get really close together, like they might be talking nearly in parallel with one another, but more often than not, there's a pretty broad spectrum there between your story and the other person's story, and what actually happened is somewhere kind of in the middle of them. And so like you as the GM building, like, here are just the facts, here's how the nomads have interpreted it, here's how the police have interpreted it based on what they know, and then maybe thirdly, here's what those who were like arrested understand it to be, right? Because they're probably gonna have a very different take than the people who came after. And so once you have all of that established, those 3 kind of like takes on the true facts of it are going to become the thing you base your narrative against, which is like, okay, we are now going to start exploring based on what they know, what do the players learn? And now your players are going to have an idea about like how they understand it, and they're going to start acting upon that. And then you might present them a couple of options. Because the reality of it is, on the back end of this is a heist, probably one way or another. It might be diplomatic, it might be not diplomatic, it might be very loud and violent. Like my players would probably approach it from the very loud, violent. Knowing my plan.
Oh, never. What do you mean? We've never. I mean, they're probably being transported in Militech Gorgon. We can't break one of those down. No, we don't have a radio antenna for that.
Yeah. So my point stands that your players will come up with what they want to do about it potentially. But if they're I've worked with parties before as a player and as a GM who are very diplomatic minded, where they will go in and they'll play the leverage game, and they'll try to like blackmail and negotiate their way to resolving the conflict without blood being spilled en masse, right? Like they might have to kill 1 or 2 people, but they're very surgical about the way that they approach that operation if they have to. They're not like wanton killers that a lot of parties, I think, really devolve down into. They're very like deliberate about everything they think about doing and how they want to approach each scenario and situation. And so this is where that unknowable mid game will pan out. But you could definitely have kind of three steps forward kind of planned, right? From that initial, here are the facts as we understand them. and the hook upon which that's going to line. At the end of it all, we all kind of know this is probably going to deepen, at the barest minimum, this is going to deepen distrust between the police and the nomads. It already has. And unless some very, very good common ground can be established, which, let's be honest, it's Cyberpunk, that's probably not going to be what happens. But unless that does, things are probably going to get heated and the tension's going to rise until eventually it just kind of like boils over into a scalding mess.
And the way I see it, no matter how this plays out, maybe you do get the jailbreak to go off. The Aldecaldos are probably never going to be trusted again after this whole thing by the NCPD. There is going to probably be no ifs, ands, ors, or buts about it. And, in turn, hey, suddenly my attack dog doesn't like these, outsiders from LA. All the corporations are going to be looking at the Aldecaldos, which even in Night City Atlas, the corporations are already working on ways to cut the nomads out by building the harbor over in Upper Marina.
Yep. Yeah, so it's very, very, like, it could develop in a couple of different ways. And a lot of how that happens in the mid game is going to be largely defined by your players. But so the way I would start kind of planning, and this is kind of how you preserve the continuity of any scenario, right? Is you say, here's where it's going to start. Here's the inciting incident. Here's maybe my first gig. And I've planned the start and end of that gig for like where the player characters are going to wind up at the beginning and the end of it, and what their goals are going to be. But like, because it's a heist, there's actually like a sort of a script for one of these in, I believe it's Collecting the Random. It's either Collecting the Random or the core rulebook. There's a section talking about, there's a section that talks specifically about, you want a campaign talking about breaking into Mr. K's vault.
Collecting the Random.
It is in Collecting. That's what I thought. So I would highly encourage you to look over Collecting the Random, because it gives a pretty nice framework for if you're going the jailbreak route, if that is the players, they want to go the jailbreak route of like, we are going to break into NCPD precinct, whatever that they're being held at, and we are going to bust them out. They're going to need to know the layout. They're going to need to know what traps are in there. They're going to need to have the devices necessary to break and circumvent all of that. And my thing that I'd put in your back pocket is that there should be a secret something, like a fail-safe, the NCPD have in their back pocket, that if the players are really, really, really clever, right, they might figure this last bit out, right? Maybe. Or at least they'll get a hint about it. But they may not see it in its full glory until they're in the precinct. They think they've done it. They've just broken the nomads out of their cell. They're running through one of the adjacent hallways to lead out of the precinct when suddenly surprise drops on them. Whatever it is. Could be a trap, could be a person, could be any number of different things. There's a lot of ways that could play out. But the bottom line is that I would build that in to your plan for whatever that precinct looks like. Because this is going to depend more on the location itself and less the actions that the sides are both taking in that moment. Because we kind of know that's where it's going to end up, right? So when you build the path in for like whichever route they take, make certain things tougher or softer depending upon what they've chosen. Maybe there are more people stationed there. If the police have a really bad feeling like this could turn into a jailbreak. Or if they don't suspect it, maybe they keep to their normal schedules. Maybe it's easier to slip someone a bribe or forge a ID,
And I suppose I'll take one out of, I think Melissa Wong did a really good job of drawing this one up. It's from the Devil's Cut, okay? Yeah. Now, I won't talk about the details of the Devil's Cut, but you could possibly measure exactly how alert the NCPD might be and what they might do. Mm-hmm. But also, of course, remember the NCPD hires people. These guys are going to be like, maybe they got, guys now working 12-hour shifts, staying there all day, tired as fuck. And, you might be able to catch them at a time like that.
To quote, many years of corporate IT training, when it comes to security, humans are the weakest part of any organization's security. So,
and you might find unexpected allies as well.
You could. There very well could be, like in Neon Inferno Season 2, we had a whole wing of cops that didn't agree with the way that the city was being run and the kind of power that they were literally exploiting over the people that lived in the poorer districts of the city. And they took it into their own hands to do something about that. Now, whether or not it was a good thing that they took the choices they did and did the things that they did, that's debatable. But that's where Cyberpunk is. It exists in, was it good? Was it necessary? From a certain frame of reference, yeah. But no. Does that mean the people who did it are the good guys? Does it mean the people they did it against are the bad guys?
Hans, are we the baddies?
And the Cyberpunk always leads with a degree of moral ambiguity. So the other thing that I would plan for, or prep some sympathetic cops. Maybe your gang crew, one day they find, a couple of booster gangers, crowding around a couple of cops that very clearly are like they're just looking to protect like a local bodega or something, and the owner's inside with their kids and they're terrified. And that's something like you could do something like that, and those cops immediately become somewhat sympathetic because they're not those local gangers are very much like, that's the bodega you always go to. Why on earth would you abide by those gangers coming in and busting up the place? And if the guards aren't able to take them on and you have the power to do so, why wouldn't you? So that's a way to play sympathetic with the enemy. It is definitely an interesting angle when you have a presumptive bad guy to give a couple of good eggs in the basket to see how your players respond to that.
Which, of course, one of my first thoughts, if we're looking at people from Danger Gal dossier, there is cavalry. She, she is an edge runner. She is the lawman for, I think, the core 10 characters.
Yeah, the ones that you get in the pre-builds that you can get in the what do they call it? The one-shot pack.
The single shot pack. And of course, you could even get someone you could really influence pretty hard. Cherub.
Yep.
he's all bright-eyed, all about the public trust.
Oh. So yeah, it's weird that they would just kick in the door like that. Look, I wasn't in my training. Probably what Cherub would say to something if you came to them about something like that.
Cherub reminds me of a couple of my best trainees, and it's just I'm glad that they put that guy there. But then, of course, throw it to for the continuity as well, in the story. Like we also talked about the conveyance of repeating characters. Throw that one cop, that one or two cops that might just know a little too much about that crew.
Yep.
Perhaps the crew tried to take the diplomatic approach, and now they're just being tailed by some person that just happens to have shoes that are just a little too clean, or happens to have a gun that's just a little too nice for this part of town.
Yep.
Or just happens to be the standard issue of the NCPD.
Yeah, play both sides.
Play fair.
Yeah, play both sides, because you can create sympathetic police. You can also create wholly unsympathetic or potentially even traitorous by a certain definition of that word members of the Nomads that might be looking to work against the players for one reason or another. Like, yeah, you know, I never liked those two. They just got what they were always creating fucking trouble. All right. They'd take our cars out, and the next day you might find like dents, dings, and that's if they brought the car back at all. Sometimes we'd have to go into the city a week later, and we'd find the thing a fucking flaming pile of scrap. Or at least what was left of it was a smoldering pile of scrap. Flames long died out. Like, yeah, so they might not have a problem with these two being arrested.
Perhaps Endo got sold out because Endo is the lead of the Sightseers pack. Somebody else wants Endo's spot and
Also
just
true.
couldn't get in. And just couldn't get in.
Yep.
Or it could be, you know, Swirl, who is a known evader of the NCPD. Somebody sold her out.
Yep.
It could also be someone set up a con to, you know, collect a little reward money.
Yep.
There's a bunch of different ways that you can play this, and either way, the Aldecaldos will publicly probably not look good, no matter how this plays out. You might be doing this for the right reasons, but right and good never seem to always fall in the same lines in Cyberpunk.
Yep. Yeah. The people who are supposed to defend justice usually aren't just. And the people who claim that they're doing good things for the residents of Night City are usually not themselves good. Like,
I mean,
yeah.
wood chippers just trying to make a fucking profit at the end of the day. So, I mean, yeah, she might be she's a peace-loving fixer, but peace has its price too. Why do you think she walks around at, you know, 7 foot, you know, 300 pounds of, you know, meat and metal? And tripped. But there is a lot of different ways that you can play this. And like for many other campaigns, other things of continuity, my piranhas are a little bit different compared to what I've heard about the actual piranhas. My piranhas, they're just there to have a good time. But apparently the actual piranhas are kind of weird. They're kind of weird, as in they like to, you know, take some of the older pickings of yo gangs to employ them. And it's just like, why leave the kids alone?
Not Night City. There's a really interesting thread that one of my GMs that I played under once threw at me, where this was in our Jumpstart kit days, so we did not have a lot of the hard lore, the characters that we know today established yet. We were in the like, everything's new, nothing is understood, so we're gonna wing it and see what flies, right? And it was the most like, the players took the reins for the session kind of thing, because we were walking down the street, because they're like 3 blocks from the apartment we all lived in, which was the apartment that we, you know, the adventure in the JSK that you're living in at the start of that. We're walking from this apartment to a local taco stand that sits on the side of the street, right? It's one of those street bar type deals. And this thing is not necessarily as hush-hush in the local community. They're pretty well known to deal drugs. And so we're like, yeah, like, let's go get some tacos down at the local shop. Because this group had a ton of stoners in it. So like, well, of course, like, we're going to just go down the street, we're going to go talk with the local dealer, like, see what they've got. And while we're on our way, we get approached by this kid who comes out of an alley to greet us and begging for money. Like, this kid's a panhandler. Kid looks the part, looks poor, looks dirty, looks like he doesn't have 2 pennies to rub together. And so, like, one of us was like, oh yeah, like, we'll give him a couple bucks. But one of our party members had low light vision. And so she looked down the alleyway. Our GM said, oh yeah, you see 2 guys who quickly duck when they see you looking back their direction, realizing that you might be able to see them. And we quickly understood, like, these guys are grifting using a kid, basically, to do their dirty work. And this turned into us gunning the two down and saying, well, kid, you're free. And the kid, of course, said, no, I'm not. And ran off horrified. Because the kid doesn't know what he's going to do now. And so we had to, like, grapple with a lot of societal, like, meta narrative in there before we ever got to the taco shop. And the taco shop was kind of the resolution of the gig that night. It was so weird, but it was entirely led by us walking in, our GM just throwing in a little bit of chaos, and it's like, here's a kid. He's begging for money. What do you want to do? So understand that no matter when you read, I think this is kind of human. Those of us who are optimistic, I think, have a tendency, because I know I've done this too. You read into an organization like some of the gangs that are talked about that deal in things like party drugs, or that are, you know, more like 6th Street. They're supposed to be a protection gang, right? We read into those all of our hopes and dreams for what we'd hope an organization like that would represent in a time and in an era that they're most needed. But we always, I feel like, need to be reminded and remember. And I think based on some of the discussions we've had with Jay and Rob at some of these conventions, there was a point where Diamond brought up her vision about the piranhas, and Jay, we were literally in Robin.
James Hutt
Was it
destroyed
James?
the piranhas.
It was James, yeah. Because I'm like, because we were all in, that's right, because we were in our hotel room at PAX, and James literally like lifts his head up as he hears Diamond talking about the piranhas and her narrative.
Skimmer,
yeah,
you know?
and like, so he lifts his head up and says, no, the piranhas are absolutely twisted and evil. And she's like, how?
Like,
what do you mean?
They're just there for a fucking good time. And
he starts peeling back all the reasons why these guys are actually kind of scummy, and they're kind of doing things that aren't great, and most people wouldn't find savory. And then Diamond's like goes fishing basically at that point for other groups in the city. Like,
okay, what about, like, even ruined Gang's wheels, a bicycle shop.
Yeah,
like,
well, all those parts are probably stolen from the NCU bikes that aren't locked up properly. And so, yeah, someone's going to market, like, and so if you come, to the shop looking for your bike, he'll probably sell it back to you if he hasn't pieced it out yet. But he's going to piece it out probably, or ransom it. How do you think he got there? How do you think he affords rent? Like, and like, it's funny because even I started leaning back and like poking holes in things, and James was like, "Yeah, that like so
you guys are being monsters to me while I was drunk about this whole thing." Like, and I was like, "Well, what about 6th Street? They're just veterans trying to protect their community and like gun running and racketeering." And I'm like, "Damn it!"
It's just, let's list the crimes now. We don't even need to be specific about it. We could just say, protection, racketeering, like that's what they're doing. Congrats. Like, so it's very, the advice to bring us back to the beginning of that tangent. Do not ever be afraid to play both sides, because both sides exist in every organization that is any reasonable size within the city. There is no such thing as a truly altruist group within the broader context of things there.
And yeah, I think about that. It's just like, shit. Of course, like you said, we're playing both sides. It also helps with the continuity, because yes, there might be people, like, according to the continuity, that do this, but there also might be people that do that as well. And it's just like it helps with the continuity, because of course there's good cops and bad cops in the NCPD. Like, we look at River Ward.
Yep.
I know I know people have mixed feelings about River, but like, you know, he was a good detective. He was just trying to do his job and, you know,
I
save
like
some
River.
kids.
River reminds me a lot of the cops that, because for those of you who don't know, my dad is a cop, or was a cop. He's retired now, but he was a cop in Chicago of all places for like 25 years. So he saw a lot of shit. And so like, I am decidedly in the group of people that knows there are good cops out there, because I knew a lot of them growing up. Like I we were friends with all of the families, right? Like one of my best friends growing up, he was my dad's partner. It was his daughters and I were friends. They came to our birthday parties. They came to our Christmas parties. Like we were in a lot of the events. We were in the same class at school. Like that's the kind of thing. Like there are good cops, even if there are plenty of cops that would abuse power to get what they want. And there is that moral gray. It exists even in Night City, in a place that we very much, I mean, it's written as a satire of society. Night City and Cyberpunk are satire at the end of the day. Very dark satire, but it's satire. And so it's one of those things though to remember, in the reality of it, there is definitely two sides and both should be represented. There's no problem with bringing that there are good cops, there are bad nomads. There are good people, there are bad people, and what they do as a day job or the orgs they belong to doesn't change that. It just changes their perspective and how they respond when certain scenarios are presented to them. And so it's your job as the GM in a lot of these cases to think about that in advance, because that a lot of continuity starts with how you plan and the answers you have to those initial questions that I mentioned at the start of the section here. And it ends with you connecting that to the inevitable conflict you can see coming. And maybe you have two versions of that. You know, you have one where the players do succeed in diplomacy and negotiation if they do want to take the peaceful route. If they're in a gang, odds are they probably won't. So the moment you notice that kind of option fade from the table, either because the players have outright rejected it, or because you know you're beyond a point of no return where the cops are concerned, where they're like, no, these are nothing more than casual criminals, and the worst among them might be even levied the title terrorist. They might bandy that about when talking about them. And so the moment that's becoming the discourse on the police's side of things, the negotiation door slams shut pretty quickly. And the only thing that might reopen that is a literal hostage situation on both sides. Hey, we have one of yours, you have some of ours. We trade, we get to walk away. And even that is not without conflict or tension or any of those things. So that's where I would then, plan on the ending that you see as most likely for the most part. Think about the other kind of passively until either it becomes more obvious that is the direction that they're going, and then flesh it out, or eliminate it and then really zero in on like, okay, what are all the nuanced bits of this ending that I know are going to be true probably by the time the players get there, or at the very least know the agenda and plans of that force that is working on that end of the plan, so that if the players are quicker or more efficient than you thought they'd be, you know at what phase of the plan the group is at, so you can play it true to form, right? Because the sorts of things you might plan for in that ending, they are miracle workers, right? So every plan's got to have that little bit of gray flexibility in there to allow for the players' decisions to change the outcome, or their speed affecting how prepared or how well planned the defense of the precinct is, or however it shapes up. That is all going to look different depending on the knowledge the players acquire, how they use it, and the tools that they choose to bring with them when the time comes that they're going to execute whatever that plan ends up being. And that is kind of how we build continuity, because you have that solid beginning, you have a solid end point, and in the intermediate steps between the two, you're building a lot of those plans or hooking in characters dependent on player choice, and you just know you have a toolbox of things that you can just grab and throw into a scene, and the players will do what they do with them. And that's kind of how the mid game, as we've talked before on the podcast, gets built. It's going to be built around items and characters, and not so much around things that you are like pre-planning each session so much. There might be like some really concrete hook points. They're like, this is a hook I am building for this moment, but you may only have the hook, and the players just might need to give their input to go anywhere, because you're not going to have like a fully firm planned thing, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you know where to connect the dots at the end of the day so that that continuity is preserved. That's the real test of the mid game for you as the GM, is like, know what you've given the players up to now, know what players they've interacted with, know what characters rather they've interacted with, know what those characters' motivations and agendas are, and then play them true to character and how they'd respond to the characters. And that will keep a very cohesive kind of narrative and image, regardless of what might actually happen. If we were talking strictly on concrete Night City lore, this is where we come back to point number one. This is your world, your game. Lore doesn't mean shit. Canonical doesn't matter. You just do what feels right and what fits your narrative and your players' life paths, stories, etc., because that is their story, not the story that would be written by like Mike Pondsmith or Jay Gray.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So at the end of the day, of course, as always, your table, your story, and you can use what they offer in the books as guides, and also even just ways to help add life to the world as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that kind of breaks continuity, but it was the way I introduced a character. I guess it's not a spoiler. It's a way I introduced Drummer. Mm-hmm. In the data pack, there is this nervous guy on the subway. This nervous guy in cheap office attire. That it's just like, you know, yeah, that's Drummer. That is Drummer right there in one painting. So yeah, I had them meet Drummer originally on the train before they went on to do Drummer and the Whale like a month later. And the one guy that remembers Drummer was like, "Hey, how are you doing? How's the new job going?" So yeah, that's kind of where that falls. But in the end, between conveyance and continuity here, the conveyance is helping you get from point A to point B of each part of your story. And at the end of the day, it is your story. So continuity, if it's important to you, it's important to you, but it doesn't have to be by the book.
Yep.
As I see it.
Yeah, like, and I think that the most important thing when it comes to canon is making sure that you and your players are all on the same page about, here's what canonically happened in the world. So if you're going to take major departures from that, that needs to get discussed in whatever passes for a session 0 or planning session that you and your players have. I think like that is one of the biggest lessons I've learned from running other systems. Most significantly among them and recently among them is Fabula Ultima, because the whole of your session 0 is actually its own. There are game critical things you have to do in session 0 in that game in terms of building the world that your players and you are going to play in. And if you're going to make major departures from Night City of canon, that is where you talk about that with your players. If it would affect their life paths, this is also where we talk about that, like how the life paths kind of factor in or modify the state of where things are at. There's a time to do all of that, and that's pretty much where that is. So my recommendation is to do all of that prep work in advance so that you can alert your players like, all right, so I know in canon Night City is this or that. In this instance, it's mostly that with this one exception. And so then you talk about the exception, your players then can ask questions and you can fill them in. So it serves good, lore serves as a good common reference point. And that's kind of how I would use it to where you start. But once you've started, the canon is, the word means nothing, just about nothing. Might get you connected into things as you move along, but it is not, you do not need to be orthodox with your canon. Canon events got you this far. That is all that matters for canon events. So yeah, that's the main thing to keep in mind there. But yeah, so with that said, I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about continuity. You got anything else there, Diamond?
I don't think so. However, so it was also a question of the week, but let me quick check to see if I had any questions this week. Oh, I had one question. I will throw it on the Q&A page here in just a sec.
Yeah, I'm just updating the text here on my end real quick to Q&A. All right. In chat, and to those of you watching this later on Spotify or YouTube, if you want to be part of the show and enjoy the time with Diamond and I live on twitch.tv on either of our channels, you can do that. We merge our chat at the start of the show. We, can both see what the other's chat is doing and typing and all of that. So if you have questions, you can ask them. This is the part of the show where we answer them. If you just want to hang out with us and listen to the stuff that we're talking about live, and maybe be one of the many chats that we kind of respond to haphazardly throughout the show, this is where you could do that. But we stream this every Thursday at 4:30 Pacific, 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern. The GMT on that is, again, Diamond, I believe, roughly like...
It's a little after. Culture Nerd, when does it start for you? Because I know you're over in GMT. It's like, what, 12:30?
I think it'd be 12:30 from at least where I'm...
It's either 11:30 or 12. Well, actually, when does it normally start for you? Because I know we're still in the weird wumbo jumbo of daylight savings not lining up in the world. 12:30 for GMT. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So that is when you can find us, where you can find us. Of course, if you are in one of those time zones for which this is prohibitively late for all of you, absolutely no problem. Simply find us on YouTube or Spotify, as you already have probably if you're hearing me say this, and put your comments there, and we will happily respond to those. We also have an email, wireheadspod@googlegroups.com. If you send us an email there, we will be able to receive it, respond to it, etc. And that's how we got the continuity topic for today's episode, was through one of those emails. So I do check them, albeit sometimes not as frequently as I maybe should. I'll try to do better in the future with that. But yeah, that is another place you can reach us if you want to reach us that way. So let's see what we've got for the question of Diamonds here. All right. So what are the best tools you recommend for a GM to have, whether it be books, DLC, or even, God forbid, actual items? A GM screen. The Cyberpunk Red GM screen is incredibly useful. So if we're going to talk about game aids, that is one of the biggest, best game aids that I can think of. I run on a VTT that automates a lot of things, and even then I find that thing incredibly useful for range tables. As a quick reference, for the critical wound tables, the other thing that's on there that's really helpful is materials HP. So like if you're shooting at cover and that cover is made of a particular type of material, how much HP does it have based on its thickness? That is all on the GM screen. It's very, very, very useful. So that is probably, no matter what else you're getting, that is probably the first game aid type thing that I might recommend. Diamond, where do you think they go from there in your mind?
So, other game aids I'm thinking about, of course, if you are doing like an IRL game, you can of course use Loki. Well, we're not sponsored by them, but I like using it for my IRL games. Loki Battle Mats makes this dry erase book of maps that some of them even show up in Cyberpunk Red stories. And it's very useful to have that grid, so you can even just measure out squares, like, okay, 6 squares, so 12 meters. Yeah, I'm in range. Bang.
Yeah.
That's really, really helpful for determining, where people are. You don't have to have big, fancy 3D structures. But Monster Fight Club actually does make, some cool stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
Again, not sponsored. I will do a Monster Fight Club video, but I will do that after I move, once I have some space to do it, and when I'm not worried about all that. But yeah, I got my big box of Monster Fight Club stuff that we'll look into. Yeah, and they also make miniatures as well of the NPCs. Now, if we're looking at books, I'd say for GMs, some of your best tools outside of course, is the core rule book. But I'd say books. I personally want to say if you're, again, like I've always said, if you prefer pre-written stuff, if you are really new and you just want a full campaign, Hope Reborn. If you like having a little bit more non sequitur, Street Stories. If you want pre-written stuff. If you need NPCs to flesh out the world, Danger Gal Dossier, which also has the NPC generator as well.
Yeah.
And then Black Chrome also includes information about the economy as well.
Yeah, I think pretty much every Red book that has been published, that's a full supplement. They all have different things, and it more is a priority for you in terms of what do you get first, but all of them are good. All of them are useful. They all have different things that present as useful in them. I think that Black Chrome is pretty much a must buy. That's probably that's the one I always recommend getting first before any other, because the core rulebook is great. The equipment it gives you is great. Black Chrome, though, really kind of completes the image of the stuff, and it comes with things for your players and you as the GM. So that's why I always recommend it. It's going to have the widest usability by the table as a whole. But yeah, like Diamond is saying, if you need pre-written stuff, the first things that I'd be looking at once you're done with the stuff that you can get free as DLCs and the scream sheets out of the back of the book would be probably picking up one of the Tales of the Red books. And then it's just a question of do you want random adventures that largely don't really flow together? Or do you want an actual written as a campaign that goes from cover to cover and leads you in from one thing to the next throughout the whole book?
I suppose in the matter of DLCs for GMs, as I'm looking at my giant list of DLCs that I definitely don't have all crammed in a folder away from everywhere else. Of course, we have the single shot pack. If you need to just do pre-generated characters, there's a single shot pack, very useful.
Yeah.
Let's see, we've got, of course, kind of looking through here for GM stuff specifically.
I mean, your adventures stuff, there's the Halloween screen sheets we got a couple years ago. There's also Red Chrome Cargo, which is probably my favorite one-shot adventure we have so far for the game. There's also...
Hot Pursuit for car chases.
Yeah, it's a good rule set to have on your hands. There's some of the mini game stuff if you want to do something that's a little more like off out of left field. There's Diamonds, my favorite thing, Elf Lines Online. That is always a good time.
My players love mini games.
Yeah,
chasing the rabbit is a blast. It does take up a session, but it's fun. You get to be involved in combat without there being any serious consequences.
Yep, Stickball's kind of the same way.
You might get hurt in Stickball, a little more hurt. Let's see. Of course, the Jumpstart. If you get the JSK, which we've talked about in when we were talking about Nomad Presents Radio, the conversion kit is helpful, so that way you can use the missions there. Which the Scream Sheets and the apartment, they're great missions. Mm-hmm. Listen Up with John and Listen Up with Rob Mulligan are also good if you're looking for some varying house rules that you might want to introduce to your table.
Yeah,
that's
they
always
both
a good one.
They both have some decent writing tips as well for you as like a GM looking to cook your own stuff.
The Last Minute Gig Generator by Rob Mulligan has saved my butt a few times.
It's very, very good. Well, and so and the other thing I'll mention too about the JSK is if you're going to use that one, the Jumpstart kit, just make sure that you do look at the conversion guide for the gigs, because there's a DLC specifically for how to translate them, because the rules weren't totally nailed down yet with that kit when it came out. And so just keep that in mind. Like if you run it out of the box as is, you're running with a set of rules that are vastly different in a lot of cases, or the adventures that were written under certain assumptions that were vastly different in that, box's release compared to what we ended up getting. So just bear that in mind. But they are good. The Apartment is probably one of my favorite intros to Cyberpunk that, if you're looking to start like a full-blown campaign, you do way worse than The Apartment. It's a very nice look at the fragile ecosystem of Night City, and especially the poor districts of it where the players usually start. It's a great kind of insight into that and puts you in the player's shoes. So I have a recommendation actually that maybe isn't, it's not Cyberpunk. So this is where we fly off a little bit, or at least it's not first party Cyberpunk. It's more generalized. There is a drive-through RPG. It's either pay what you want or it's extremely cheap. It's like on the order of like, I think it's under $10. Well, at least when I bought it was under $10, but it's called Augmented Reality. So what Augmented Reality is, it's a city builder. So it's got a ton, and I mean a ton. It's like I think 30-page little booklet full of roll tables from everything from like street scenes, sensory information, like what do you smell, what do you see, what do you hear. And like it's got a block by block system for rolling out what is in a city block. So if you're really trying to get like hyper detailed, those of you who want to play a more open open world type game, the stuff you get in Augmented Reality is like actually incredible for doing that, because you build out like, okay, yeah, so on this street there is a Con-App complex where you all live, but then down the street from that, this is your local pharmacy. There's a guy out the back who does clinic work. Next to that you've got like a local pawn shop that's next to the local bodega, and like all of this can be done just with Augmented Reality. If you still want more roll tables after that, there's Cyborg, which I would highly recommend having just for the generation tables.
Pocket Lint.
Pocket Lint is great.
I use Pocket Lint so often.
Pocket Lint and the mission generator can also be fairly easily adapted to Red. You just kind of, anything that talks about statistical math, you just overwrite it with Red system stuff. But for generating core concepts, it's another mission generator you can use. Cyborg also has some free online tools that give you that same stuff, which is very, very useful. It just may not make as much sense contextually without the book, because obviously their universe has different corps and stuff in it. So you're going to want to like find the analog corps, or maybe you import them wholesale to read like this corp exists.
Oh no.
So, I mean, for some it might be really fun.
Yeah, actually, but it's like,
yeah.
If you are looking, if you have a group that's more of in the investigative camp, which I've talked about this a little bit more about different players. If you have a group that's in the investigative camp and not like quite all of them, Did Somebody Say Murder is a really good tool for helping run investigations. And also Blade Runner, I know Blade Runner is a very different genre of cyberpunk going on, but they have some actually really useful chase rules as well if you would rather use that over hot pursuit. I don't know, like I feel like the chase system in Blade Runner personally, I really like it.
Well, it's interesting because the chase rules in Red emulate with the system differences taken into account, it's a very close kind of translation
analog
between the two. Yeah, like
it just goes from cards to dice.
Yeah, so if you're looking at Hot Pursuit, you're getting Red's version, I think, of like, because when we first discovered Blade Runner through Rob, of course, we very much like, that was well before Hot Pursuit was a thing. And we literally were like, oh yeah, like that just makes sense. The chase in here, it makes sense. So like now with Hot Pursuit, we actually have the rules, and it's pretty damn close to the rules laid out for Blade Runner system. So like, but I do agree, Blade Runner is like a really good way of mapping, doing kind of the work I was talking about before, where it's like you're trying to map out like, here's what you're doing, what's the enemy doing, and that's what we call in Blade Runner, it's called the countdown. But learning how the countdown is structured is very useful, especially for investigative gigs. But it literally is like, here's how you think about the enemy's side of things, and then build a clock around it, essentially, which is really, really cool.
Night City Weather. Throw if you really want to throw a wrench into things, rain on their parade.
Yep.
With blood or acid.
Yeah.
Or have a haboob happen or something like that.
Or random, the thing that Ghost will never get absolved of fully, at least in his own mind, is, oh no, if I ask Emmerron to roll weather, it's gonna be dog shit. And I'm like, yeah, because it's every time he's reminding me to roll weather halfway through a gig, it's always really bad. It's like either a massive thunderstorm's coming in, or there's a sandstorm, or there's blood rain.
Or it's hot.
Never fails. Never. No, it's not even something as mild as like it's hot or it's cold. It is like, it's always strange weather, and it's always something violent and awful for whatever they're trying to do. Like,
one of my parties often rolls blackouts because I have them roll the dice, and it's just like, oh, hey, your agents don't work.
So the one time that I was at a table where a blackout got rolled, actually, was a really cool character building moment, because my character, we had just gotten out of Reaping the Reaper, and my character he had like 5 humanity left. He was like he was on the verge. No, I think he had even less. I think he was down to 2. Like he was on the verge, and he's in his cargo container scrolling his agent, like just trying to like clear the image of his dead ally out of his mind, because our Netrunner was the only one that died, in contrast to Diamond's group, she being the Netrunner, the only one who lived. So in ours, our Netrunner was the only one to die, and like I kept trying to cover for him. I was like his med guide, be right next to him, and it was just like, all right, kid, I just need you to, go for one final push against this fucker, and then I'll pull you out of it. You'll come back. We'll all celebrate this with a drink. And he's like, yeah, I got you, Virgil. Just give me a sec. And he fries the fucking Reaper at the end of everything. And like, again, this is going to be as non-spoilery as I can get it, but he fries the Reaper at the end of it all. And when the dust is settled, I'm standing over him, and I'm like, yeah, we did it, kid, and realize he's gone. So I'm agonizing about this in my cube, right? Like, or in my cargo container after it's all said and done that night. And I'm like looking through my agent, trying to forget, trying to block it out. Glancing at the different street drugs I have up because I keep some on hand just in case someone needs something. And I'm like, any one of these could send me spiraling over the edge and it'd be over. And I wouldn't have to think about this anymore. I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. But I didn't, obviously, because I don't want to give the character up that easy. And then the power cuts because we rolled a blackout. And my GM starts describing, and for the first time, maybe in your lives, you look up at the sky and you can see stars. And like then talks about, like, he had the player at the table that was playing the Netrunner. It's like, what would he hear? Like Isaac say if Isaac was trying to like console him in this moment. And he says, well, probably here, don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. I did what I did. I did it willingly. And like made this very emotional, like the whole table was crying by the time this blackout was over. Cause it turned into this deep, like, we connected with our humanity in the moment. And as we stepped outside and could see the night sky clearly for the first time in a long time. And it's just like that. It was really cool. So like weather is very cool. I highly recommend Night City Weather. It's a great, great thing to have at your disposal. Cause I remember they initially made that DLC a bunch of tweets at one point early in the game's life cycle. I was so happy they formalized it because I was like, oh fuck, I need to go back and get those.
It's same with collecting the random was also the random is also good. It's
Very
also good if you need prompts to build a story, or if your players are trying to get ideas of like, okay, I think I'm happy with this role, but like I want to pick up something else. What can I do with it? There's that. Another tool I recommend, of course, is the Night City Atlas. Shows you all these awesome locations that your players can have access to, but also achievements and loot boxes. Yes, the April Fool's Merit Badge DLC. Emmerron, I'm just going to let you take a guess here. Why am I suggesting achievements and loot boxes?
Oh, well, I mean, because it's the one legal way in the rules is written that we get rerolls. But it also adds some very interesting things that you can have your players reaching for. The achievements are great. I think they're all pretty much incredible. And some of them are really off the wall. Like one of them is survive riding the roller coaster at Playland by the Sea. You're like, why wouldn't I?
like, huh?
We've had this
still under construction.
We've had that DLC because what that DLC came out in 2003 or not 2003, 2023. Yeah. It came 2 years ago, almost. It came out, and we have still not gotten any reasonable like explanation of why does it say survive as an achievement.
James Jay Gray and Cody Pondsmith put this in front of us with no explanation.
Yep.
Just here, leave, and then just drops it in front of us and leaves. But like, there's other achievements here that also encourage your players to explore.
Yep.
Encourage your players to actually pursue things that they want, like reputation level 7 for 15 minutes of fame. Flatlined, actually holding a funeral for a dead player character. Yep. Gamer, complete an Elfline's online dungeon without any elves in your party dying.
It's good.
Healer adjust. Anyway,
adjust.
Totaled. Oh, hey, Total. Destroy a vehicle owned by a member of the crew or their nomad family. Whoops. Vengeance. Kill the character directly responsible for a player character's death. VIP. If you work hard enough, you might get an invite to a midnight market.
Well, and then there's always there's ones like Ground Zero, which is like stand in the ruins of Arasaka Tower. And it's like, it's so cool because like it's a neat set piece that I don't know. Like I've used it before in one or two of my campaigns as like a place that people would go to find something, but it's really interesting. I think that like whenever you read through that, you'll see like, here's a bunch of stuff that you can just be like, how could I use that as a hook right? Or like what could I do or plan or set in front of my players that would entice them to roam that direction or try to achieve that. And it's fun. I love achievements and loot boxes. And the loot boxes, if you visit my channel once we get Neon Inferno back on the air, we actually do loot boxes for channel points. I think that it's a fun little extra mechanic because nothing in those loot boxes typically break the game. They're very goofy, fun kind of things, but they are they're interesting. They're a lot of fun. But yeah.
So yeah, those I think are like the big tools that I can think of.
There's one additional, and I know we're going kind of long.
Okay.
Right now. That is another non Artelsorian or Cyberpunk thing, which is, and there are two of these. I only own one of them, but it's another drive-through RPG resource, and the one I have is 100 things the organ leggers left behind. And so it's like you walk into some scrapped up heap of brick and concrete that looks like it could collapse in on itself. And clearly this was the site of some scavs coming in, not too different from the start of 2077 where, you know, you got bodies lying around in a tub and, you know, maybe they've just packed some things away, chromes in the fridge or whatever, because they still need to peel the meat off of it. And it's literally 100 things list of like things that could have been left behind. And I think there's like, actually there is another one I own, which is 100 files on the net. And it's like 100 different things, and they're very system agnostic. So like all of this conforms to no one system. So you can use it as like a starting point and tweak based upon Red's or your campaign sensibilities and like what you want to use it for. Both of those 100 things lists are really, really useful. And I'm pretty sure those definitely, I think, were either free or pay what you want. They're not, none of these resources are more than a couple bucks tops. Like they're really, really reasonable.
And then the data pack also has those 20 things lists as well. Yeah. And some good scream sheets as well that are like with a couple that are lead ups to Reaping the Reaper.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, wow, that's actually a pretty good list of stuff. And finally, what is by far your favorite snack during game sessions? By my friend Fish. Well, Fish, you should know this one quite well. I like my pretzels and I like my Pepsi. You know that one. Yeah.
I'm like, I usually have either, I mean, I've got my empty from today. I've got a can of Rockstar. I'm under caffeinated for the day, and that'll fix that problem. Or a cup of water. Like usually I'm pretty boring. I've got either a can of Rockstar or a cup of water. As far as like snacks, because I usually stream when I play, or I'm on a mic, munching is not something I tend to do a lot of, but I will say, like, when I'm playing around a table, I think some of my favorite things that I've had to snack on are either like grapes. Grapes are awesome, actually. Or like, yeah, pretzels or chips that aren't full of like I really don't like Doritos or Cheetos because they get dust all over my fingers and that gets on my character sheet. But pretzels or like Ruffles with like a dip are like very, very good. Those are awesome.
All right. Well, anything else?
Nope. I think that's pretty much the end of it. So guys, for those of you who are watching this on Spotify and YouTube, thank you all for watching another one of the episodes over here. Again, if you are here on YouTube specifically and you're watching this one and you haven't seen part one, continuity is made possible by Conveyance. So definitely check that out. Diamond and I had a conversation of that at the start of the episode today. So check that out down in the description below. And otherwise though, for those of you who are here on Twitch, thank you for hanging out as always. But that's it for this week, guys. So until next week, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you're in the world. Stay healthy, stay safe. And until we see you all again, peace, guys.
Bye-bye.